Well, good morning. Welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. Have I got a treat for you today? We're going to make a fancy little dessert that's deceptively easy and something you can make ahead and assemble right before your guests are ready for dessert. It's lemon curd tarts. I had several people ask me for a video on making lemon curd, so I thought I would just go ahead and make them into some tarts. Here are the ingredients. You can pause and write them down. And hey, while you're paused, you know how much I'd like it if you subscribed and give us a thumbs up. Now let's get cooking. I have a couple of really nice lemons here. And the first thing I'm going to do is zest them. Now, I'm going to zest a pretty good amount. I didn't measure the finished product, but you want at least a tablespoonful of zest, and you can use whatever you want. A lot of this depends on how sour you want it, how sweet you want it. So as I zest this, I'll just let you know, if you're not familiar with lemon curd, it's like the inside of a lemon meringue pie, sort of like that. And you can make it ahead and serve it in many different ways. There's actually even a lemon curd recipe for canning. But this is not it, so don't think you can can this recipe. You have to follow the directions for canning at National Center for Home Food Preservation. So I've zested these, got no white in it, just some of the rind. So now I'm going to juice these 2 lemons, and what I want is a total of a 1/3 cup of juice. And these should give me a 1/3 of a cup. But if it doesn't, you can either cut another lemon or add a little bottle of lemon juice just to make it up to a 1/3 of a cup. By the way, this is a half of a recipe. It's all I need for the tarts. It's actually way more than I need for the tarts. And I'll just eat the rest of it with a spoon. It's so good. So I'm going to loosen up the juice in these with a knife, and then I'll squeeze them out, and later I'll drain out any seeds or pulp. And I would show you me using a juicer, but it's not a pretty sight, so when I get these squeezed out, I'll be right back. I'm going to start with the eggs, and this takes 3 eggs, and I'm going to separate the last one and reserve the white for an egg wash for later. If you're not doing a pastry, just the lemon curd, go ahead and put all 3 whole eggs in. This is the top of my double boiler, and it is stainless steel. You need to use either glass or a non-reactive metal pot. An enameled pot would work. And you don't have to have a double boiler, but you don't want to cook this on direct heat. So you can have a pot of boiling water. There goes my last egg yolk. And set your bowl over the pot of boiling water. And you don't want the water to touch. This is my reserved white, egg white for later, for egg wash. So you're going to cook this over the steam of the boiling water and not over direct heat. Now I'm going to beat these eggs until they're creamy and light, and I'm using a silicone whisk. That's my sweetener, either a 1/2 cup of Splenda or 2/3 cup sugar. You could use stevia, but I don't know how much, so if you use stevia, you'll probably be able to figure that out. And we just beat these up. Back to the silicone whisk. You don't want to use metal, because metal on metal can cause it to change color, to darken. Strained in my lemon juice there. When you're cooking with acid, there are a few things that you want to know like that, because it can react. I'm using a stainless steel pot and a silicone whisk. You could use a wooden spoon, but just don't use metal on metal. If you're using a glass bowl, you can use a metal whisk. So we've got everything in now, for now, except for a very tiny, very, very tiny pinch of salt. And you may wonder sometimes why you salt sweet stuff, but salt helps you taste the sweetness more. And so that's why there's salt in cakes and cookies and whatever. So this is beaten up well. Now I'm going to meet you at the stove. I have about 1 inch of water in my double boiler bottom, and it's already starting to steam, you don't want the water to touch your pan. And so we'll just put that over there. Now I'm going to do the rest of this in real time, and I'm sorry if it's a little bit shaky, but I want you to see this really doesn't take long. I've looked at different recipes, and it always says you need to cook it for about 10 minutes, or it gives you a temperature, about 160 by the way. But this happens very quickly, especially with this small an amount. So I'm just going to let you see it in real time. It won't be very long. I set my timer, and actually it's only about 3 minutes, not 10. And you don't want to overcook. And I'm going to stir it almost the whole time. Now here's a little warning. While you're cooking this, it may appear to curdle. It's not really curdling, but it'll start to look as if it's separating. And if that happens, don't give up. Just whisk, stir a little more, and it'll be right back together. I suppose it might actually curdle. I've never seen it curdle. And anytime I've ever seen it look like it's starting to separate, I just stir it a little more vigorously, and it all comes back together. So I'm letting it sit there and just heat up a little bit. And the first thing you'll notice is it starts to solidify on the sides. So be sure to stir that down immediately. You don't want it to scorch at all. And I've actually seen people make this directly on the heat, but I've never tried that. I think you'd need a really heavy bottom pot. So I'm waiting just another minute. This is almost done. And while I'm waiting, I'll just tell you some of the many things you can do with lemon curd. You can eat it on toast. You can just eat it with a spoon. You can put it as a filling in cake. You can make this recipe doubled, pour it into a cooked pie crust, put some whipped cream or some meringue on top, and you've got a lemon meringue pie. Oops, there you go. That's it. You see how it's getting thick? That took somewhere between 2 and 3 minutes. Not much time at all. It would take about twice that if you doubled the recipe. And you'll know it's done here because you look at it and it looks like the inside of a lemon pie. See that? See what we've got? And it's just as creamy as it can be. And I'm turning the heat off now. And I'm going to get a spoon here and show you how to test it to make sure it's done. You coat the back of a spoon and you run your finger down it. And yes, I'm going to taste that finger. And if it stays separate, it's done. Now to finish this off, I have 4 tablespoons full of room temperature butter. My heat's off. I'm just going to throw that butter in and stir it around until it melts and it's beaten into the lemon curd. Isn't that beautiful? And when the butter's melted and all beaten in, you add your lemon zest. By the way, you can do this with lime too. And then I'm just going to beat that zest in. Now I'm going to tell you here, there is another step that's recommended that I don't do. It's recommended that you strain this through a sieve to strain out the zest. And that's probably best, but I don't do it because I like to leave the zest in. And yes, it has a little feel on your tongue, but it's so good. And it's my personal preference, but you probably really want to strain it. So I'm putting this in a pint jar, and I'm going to cover it with plastic film. You can use a bowl. I'm using a jar just because I'm going to put this in the fridge and keep it a little bit. You can make this the day ahead of your dessert. It'll keep in the refrigerator several days. Sorry, we've got a little dog bark going. And you want that film to go all the way down and touch the surface to keep it from forming a skim. And I've got it down in there pretty good. And then I'm just going to put a canning ring on it. and refrigerate it. And even if you're not making it a day ahead for your dessert, you still want to give it a good chill because it'll firm up a good bit once you chill it. So next step, I've rolled out, it's either 1 sheet of puff pastry or this is 8 ounces of my homemade puff pastry. I cut 8 squares. You can cut circles. You see about the size. And then on 4 of them, I'm going to cut a smaller square out. And I want to pick the right one to do it. Let's see, that one. And you don't want to roll this really thin. You just roll it big enough to give you the 8 pieces. So I'm going to stack the cut squares on top of the solid squares. And so that they'll stick, I'm going to egg wash the bottoms. This is actually how you make something called vol au vent, which means flight of air, something like that. Anyway, you could put several of those little cut squares on top. Most often they're circular. I just like to use squares because they have less waste. And you could put several on top of it and make it get very, very high. So I've got those done, and then I'll place these little cut squares on top. I'm going to try to match them up because they're not identical in size. And you want to handle that kind of delicately. Another way I've seen it is a solid square and then a circular top. Now the bottom part I'm going to dock with a fork, and that's to sort of keep it from rising as much as the outside. When you dock puff pastry like that, you make it rise less, make it stay a little flatter. Now they may not stay totally flat in the middle there, and if they don't, after they're done, you'll just take a little knife and sort of cut around and take out some of the middle, because what we're doing is making a casing for our curd. So I have them all assembled, and I'm going to move them to a parchment-lined cast iron skillet. And you can use any pan. If you don't have parchment, you can rub it with a little butter and sprinkle it with some cornmeal, and that'll help them brown on the bottom. So I'm placing them so they don't touch and give them plenty of room because they'll rise up. Now these little squares that I cut out, I'm going to make a little garnish, a little decoration for the top. And you can do about anything you want to. You could make them into a long piece and swirl it to make a little stick to stick in the top. But I just cut it on the diagonal, on the corners. And then I'm just going to twist it around any shape you want. And I'm going to bake it with the casings, the vol au vent. And I'll egg wash these two. And then I'll stick them on the top when it's done, and they'll just be really crunchy and cute. And you could get all creative and make little birds or little stars, whatever you want to. Now I'm egg washing everything. I've got my oven preheated to 425. And I'm going to put these into a preheated oven and bake them for about 12 to 15 minutes. I'm really sorry my camera's jumping around. Sometimes I get all involved in the cooking and forget all about the camera. So ready to go? Take them out when they're golden brown. Now the whipped cream. This is a half cup of cold, heavy whipping cream. I've got my little hand blender here with the whisk end, and this doesn't take long either. None of this takes very long, actually, once the puff pastry's made. And I'll just beat this until it's forming stiff peaks. I love my little hand blender, by the way. Stick blender, whatever you want to call it. I've had it for quite a while, and it does a really good job. And I showed this in real time, and this is just about ready. It's that quick. Now, I'm going to use Splenda to sweeten mine. You can use sugar. You can do it to taste. I'll let you see the peaks. Well, you can see it's very stiff. I'm going to add about probably a little over a teaspoonful of Splenda. You may want to add up to a tablespoonful of sugar if you're using that. And I'll just put it right in here now. And I'm going to add about a half teaspoonful of vanilla. Now you can make this ahead also. If you're using Splenda, you don't want to make it too far ahead, a couple hours, because if it sits very long, it's not like when you're using sugar. It'll start to separate. But I put this in the refrigerator probably about an hour before I assembled the final product. So I've got my Splenda in there. I've got my vanilla in there. I'm going to mix it just a little bit more. And then I'll put a lid on it and put it in the refrigerator. And for you canners out there, no, I wouldn't do this in my canning jars. These are jars that I keep in my kitchen for food prep. Once I've used metal on them, I don't put them in the canner because they might break. So this looks about right. Let me show it to you. Put a lid on it in the fridge. So all that's left is assembly, and you can do this right before you serve. You could do it before dinner and have them ready to serve. But everything can be done a little bit ahead so you're not so rushed. So there's the hole, and I did on a couple of them have to trim a little of the inside out, but it's really easy to do because it's separate. And I'm putting a heaping tablespoonful of the lemon curd in, and you can see this recipe is at least twice what I needed, so you could make up to 8 with this recipe of lemon curd, or you could make 4 and eat the rest of it after your guests leave. So I've put my whipped cream in a quart plastic bag, and I'm going to just use that to place my whipped cream. Cut a small hole in the end, and then we're just going to squirt that on. And I did that because if I try to spoon it on, it'll all stick together, and then your lemon curd and your whipped cream will mix together. And this is a really easy and cheap way for you to do it if you're somebody who doesn't have cake decorating tools, which I don't because I rarely bake a cake. And there you go. Just get creative. Do it the way you want it. Then you can put one of the little tips on top as a garnish and as flavor. The other thing you can do is slice a lemon and twist a slice of lemon, or a strawberry, or a cherry, or a couple of raspberries. Whatever you think is pretty, you can stick it on there. This is one of those things that if you really want to, you can show off. But the real showing off is in the flavor. Every piece of this is good. The curd and the cream and the puff pastry. You can serve this on a plate with a knife and fork, or you could just bite into it and hear the crunch. So sorry for my bad manners, but I thought you should hear that. This is just a wonderful dessert, quick, easy, and a little fancy. And anything you make with lemon curd is going to taste just wonderful. Oh, and I mentioned the lemon garnish. I just thought I'd let you see that. I hope you try this, and I really hope you like it. And I hope to see you again tomorrow.